was always going to be a challenging season for Steve Cooper, and unfortunately for Cooper, there has been too much conflict since the euphoria of promotion 2 summers ago, and ultimately, his grievance with the chairman Nicholas Randall was just a subplot to the real story. His inability to please Evangelos Marinakis, the club's owner, by taking Forest higher up the league. It ended this week with Cooper's sagging, having found out the former Wolves and Tottenham manager Nuno Espirito Santo was flying in to take his job, and a statement from Forest that, if nothing else, showed more warmth than had been the case for the previous managers to be sacked in the Marinakis era. In his last moments at the club, Cooper went into the boardroom to see Marinakis during an afternoon when it was carefully arranged that the outgoing manager would not bump into his replacement. Cooper, who had been given the news by Chief Football Officer Ross Wilson, refused to be sour about it, and his farewell conversation with Marinakis was amicable. The two men shook hands, and when Cooper released a statement to thank the club for some wonderful times, he took the diplomatic stance of including the owner in his tributes. It is important to Cooper to remain classy to the end. The truth, however, is that his relationship with Marinakis started to unravel a long time ago, and that until this final act, there have been all sorts of issues that have been, for the most part, kept away from the fans and public. Attitudes had hardened on both sides, and it had become such an open secret within the industry that Leeds United, relegated from the Premier League last season, seriously considered making an approach for Cooper in the summer. Even in the Championship, there were people at Ellen Road who thought it was worth asking the question, speculatively or not, just to see where it got them. More recently, Crystal Palace have been monitoring Cooper's position as a possible replacement for Roy Hodgson, the current manager. As a measure of how relations have changed, Forest had suspected for some time now that Cooper was open to the idea, not least because he was also fully aware that his own club were eyeing up managers behind his back. As sad as these moments are, Cooper was not entirely despondent, in one sense, that his relationship with Marinakis, a long, complex and occasionally hostile standoff, was drawing to an end. That will leave many Forest supporters with conflicting emotions, given that the two men have, between them, conjured up the happiest times at the City Ground since the turn of the century. On the one hand, the fans' affinity to Cooper could be gauged by the remarkable support that was shown to him during the recent 13-match sequence, when Forest won only once and fell to 17th in the table. On the other hand, those fans are also grateful, in the extreme, for the financial backing from Marinakis, and have come to appreciate that, at the heart of everything he does, there is a determination from the Greek to keep the club on an upward trajectory. His methods can be unorthodox sometimes, and anyone who has followed the story of Olympiakos, conspiracies, riots, unremitting drama, and an official statement recently claiming Greek football was run by a mafia, will know how wild it can be inside the Greek club, where Marinakis recently appointed his 6th head coach in 18 months. To a generation of Forest supporters, however, the good has far outweighed the bad since Marinakis took control in 2017 and bought a stagnant club that had little in its favour other than the comfort blanket of nostalgia. Marinakis has deep pockets, big ambitions, and a level of commitment that will always be appreciated by a fan base that had, until Cooper's appointment, spent almost a quarter of a century outside the top division. And yet there was also a thick portfolio of evidence that Cooper's popularity with the fans troubled and at times irked the owner. Marinakis did not believe Cooper had done enough during these past 18 months as a Premier League club to warrant the songs of adulation, the favourable headlines, and the absence of any real criticism. It was not what he would have expected from the fans of Olympiacos, and it was not the culture he wanted at Forest either. Cooper strayed dangerously close to being sacked after a 4-0 defeat to Leicester City in the October of last season, and again when his team were beaten 2-1 at Leeds in early April. One member of Forest's entourage described Cooper to the Leeds directors as a dead man walking. Instead, Marinakis decided to stick with him. He was widely praised and, as a result, in a TV interview at the end of the season, congratulated himself on a wise decision. But he was also candid enough to acknowledge that he had not been able to find anyone who was A, better, and B, available. There have been many dialogues, he said, of his relationship with Cooper, sometimes good, sometimes bad. That pattern continued this season, and unfortunately for Cooper, it had been apparent for some time that his position was going to be under scrutiny whenever the team had a difficult patch. In the early weeks of the season, he and Marinakis talked about some of their differences and came away with a mutual understanding that they could still be good for one another. Since then, however, their relationship spiraled again. In the last 2 months, it had been particularly distant and fractious. Many people with knowledge of the situation were surprised, if anything, that Cooper lasted as long as he did. Over the past 18 months, information had also got back to Cooper more than once that stories had been planted to the media with the apparent intention of shifting fan opinion and undermining his popularity. When Marinakis had been angry with certain performances or the manager's tactics, it had often found its way into the media. Cooper felt he was being undermined at a time when the club needed to show solidarity. The idea of Cooper encountering those issues might seem unthinkable, given his success at the club, inheriting a team that had spent 35 days at the bottom of the championship, then winning an almost implausible promotion and keeping them in the Premier League, while being favourites to be relegated. Over time, however, it has also become apparent that some of the people running the club thought the praise for Cooper went over the top. The club could never be accused of being the same. Many supporters wondered why Forest's social media channels often refrained from joining in with the Cooper acclaim. The people who understand Marinakis best say he wants to change the mindset of Nottingham as a football club. He wants an attitude that correlates more with Olympiacos, Greek champions a record 47 times, where there is an expectation of success every season and a mentality, for the most part, that anything else is unacceptable. Last season, Forest broke all sorts of records, signings, spending more on transfer fees in one summer than they had previously throughout 157 years of existence. A new signing arrived on average every 4 days. Forest spent more that summer than Barcelona, Real Madrid and Paris Saint-Germain. This summer, another 13 players arrived, including 7 on the final day of the window. It was further confirmation of Forest's status as the most prolific buyers in English football, and 3 days later, Marinakis set out the aim to achieve greatness in an open letter. The breathless excitement of transfer deadline day saw Nottingham Forest dominate the rolling sports coverage. He wrote, "Our vision for the club is clear and unwavering. We are on a path to re-establish Nottingham Forest as a dominant force in English football." Against that kind of backdrop, it becomes easier to understand why he could not tolerate the idea of Forest being just a place above the relegation zone. There were, however, mitigating circumstances for Cooper, given the obvious difficulties of having to bring together a new squad and find a winning formula, while losing key players to injuries and not having enough room to accommodate all these signings. A number of players arrived without Cooper having any input, and though that left him thinking the squad was unbalanced, he understood that was how the operation worked and did his best to make some of the more unexpected buys feel at home. Militadis, the 24-year-old son of Marinakis, is the club's second-in-command and sporting director, tracking targets and speaking to agents. His father always has the final say though, and financially nobody could ever say that Marinakis Sr. has not provided a level of backing to put Forest back on the map. 2 framed pictures inside the club's media suite were replaced at the start of the season with photographs showing Militadis. He, like his dad, wants to be associated with a successful team. Militadis even took it upon himself to deliver a speech for players in between the recent 5-0 defeat to Fulham and 1-1 draw to Wolves. In their private conversations, he and his father would challenge Cooper's views on tactics and never wavered from a view that it was their right to tell him where they thought he was going wrong. Expectations have gone up, and to give Marinakis his due, this is one of the reasons why the fans are largely appreciative of his presence. He is always wanting to move forward. If Nuno makes Forest a top 10 team, pressure will immediately be applied to make that top 6. And if that doesn't happen, he will also be vulnerable to the sack. This is just the nature of the beast. It is preferably, most Forest fans would agree, better than what they had before, when Al-Hassawi's ownership of the club was abysmal. On another level, however, there have to be legitimate questions about whether Forest's hierarchy offers the right levels of emotional support and understand the benefits of building closer relationships. Too many people leave Forest talking about what can be too often. A hard-faced working environment and the near desperation to keep the regime happy. Avoiding the huge explosions of temper, the angry WhatsApp messages, and the kind of unpleasantness that led to Ida Karanka resigning because he felt worn down by the politics of Marinakis. Marinakis was so incensed by the recent 5-0 defeat at Fulham that he stormed out at the 70th minute mark, throwing his lanyard into the garden of a house near the stadium. It can be a tough, volatile place to work, and Cooper is far from alone when it comes to the list of people who have left in difficult circumstances since the club returned to the Premier League. Dave Murphy, the chief executive who appointed Cooper, had to bring in lawyers when he was allegedly not paid his promotion bonus. Stories were subsequently leaked that Murphy's Forest's academy chief leaving in June. Brazil, who has since taken a prominent job with the FA, has been described as wounded by his treatment, having set up a production line of young footballers that made the club many millions of pounds over the previous decade. In an unrelated move, Marinakis decided that it was time to appoint a new chairman. He was dissatisfied with Randell for a number of reasons, and though he was kept on as a non-executive director, there was a run of games when Randall did not even have a place in the boardroom. Life at Forest is never dull. Visitors to the city ground one day in August were surprised to find a window had been broken inside the main entrance. The explanation was that Forest had been sprucing up that part of the stand among a series of improvements, all financed by Marinakis, before a full redevelopment in the next few years. The club wanted everything looking perfect for the first home game of the season, but something had displeased them. It isn't clear what happened next, other than that window ended up being broken. Even so, these are not the kind of events that visitors to a football club would usually expect to encounter, and kind of sums up the Marinakis Nottingham Forest. Chaos. With Cooper, however, it did come back to results, and Marinakis would have been happy to continue as long as they were a team high up the table. Questions were asked about the team's selections, his substitutions, and the money spent on some of the players. Andre Ayew, John Joe Shelvey and Chris Wood, Cooper had requested in last season's January window. Shelvey turned out to be a calamitous signing, falling out with Cooper, then being marginalised and now on a season's loan in Turkey, with Forest paying the bulk of his wage. Cooper had a fallout recently with Worrell, and the captain had not always been part of first team training when it came to match preparations. Another defender, Scott McKenna, was also sidelined because of a contract dispute that had left Cooper in agreement with Marinakis, questioning the player's priorities. None of this was a particular concern for Cooper's employers, other than the impact it might have on a potential January window. But the people at the top will always challenge and scrutinise a manager's decisions, and at times Cooper was irritated by their apparent belief that they knew better than him. One story came out recently that Marinakis was particularly unhappy about the team's record at set pieces. An approach had been made to Gianni Vio, an Italian set-piece specialist who was at Spurs during Antonio Conte's time. Everything was virtually agreed. Cooper, however, did not share the enthusiasm for Vio, and the arrangement was abandoned. Instead, Forest filled the role by hiring Simon Rusk, the England under-19s coach last week. And that again demonstrates the unorthodox way the club is run. Rusk was Cooper's pick, even though Forest were actively looking to replace him as manager. When Forest beat Arsenal 1-0 in May to ensure their Premier League status, it was a time of great celebration inside the stadium. Yet the body language of both manager and owner was awkward to say the least as they came together on the pitch. That day, they were allies of Cooper, and they shook hands and believed that he should leave Forest on a high note rather than subject himself to any more internal criticism. They were angry about what they saw as a lack of gratitude at the top of the club. Their concern all along was that other managers were being sounded out for his job. The following weekend, Forest went to Crystal Palace for the final match of the season, and a piece of footage from Twitter was brought to the attention of club officials. Again, it was an awkward exchange between Cooper and Marinakis as they applauded the Forest fans. Cooper could then be seen turning to Wayne Hennessy and saying something that, to an amateur lip reader, might have looked certainty is that Cooper will not be short of offers with a managerial CV that includes winning the Under-17 World Cup, back-to-back seasons, reaching the playoffs with Swansea, and getting Forest promoted. He was interviewed for the Palace job in the summer of 2021, and various clubs, Everton, Wolves and Southampton, have at one time or another been monitoring his position at Forest. Cooper, however, preferred to stay where he was, acutely aware he may never have a closer bond with the club's supporters throughout his career. He had a deep and genuine affinity with Forest, and felt a heavy duty of responsibility to make it work for the people who had made him one of their own. Before every home game, you could see from the way he looked around what it meant to him. His matchday attire was always Paul Smith, the Nottingham-born fashion designer. Cooper called the City Ground a magical place. His parents would regularly make the 3-hour drive from their home to Nottingham to watch the games. The bottom line, however, is that Cooper failed to meet the requirements of the Greek billionaire who stood on the balcony of Nottingham Council House on the day after Forest had won promotion and picked up a microphone to tell the crowd they should prepare for a new era of silverware. That is the challenge for Nuno, whose first game will come against Bournemouth on Saturday. But there will be inevitably other challenges too, because that is just part of everyday life at modern day Nottingham Forest and the people at the top of the club.